Good morning, everyone. I guess that's on. You hear it? So it's 10 o'clock. So I'd like to start on time. Thank you for coming and participating today. My name's Pam Wade. I'm with the district. My bureau is the Everglades and Estuaries Protection Bureau, and the bureau's focus is on monitoring water quality upstream within the watershed, source controls, research, nutrient technologies, and we're the lead on doing this rulemaking. And we're doing this rulemaking because the Florida legislature directed us to do this rulemaking in support of the overall strategies to restore and protect the Northern Everglades. So we're going to start with a 30-minute presentation by Stephanie Olson, a longtime scientist with the district and expert in the rules for Northern Everglades and Lake Okeechobee, and an expert on the Lake Okeechobee watershed. So it's about a 30-minute presentation, and we're asking that everyone hold their questions and comments and discussions until the end. And then even after the meeting closes, we'll stay around as long as you need us to do one-on-one discussions if you're more comfortable with that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Pam. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 40E-61 Works of the District Basins Rule Development Workshop. I wanted to mention one or two other things. The bathrooms are out this way, and also we are webcasting this, or it's airing live, and it's being recorded, just so you know. So, I'd like to start by reminding everyone what these rules do. The 40E-61, the existing rules, they prescribe how entities connect to the district surface water management system for the purposes of protecting water resources. And we're going to cover a number of topics today. We're going to discuss why we need to revise these rules, and we'll look at the affected geographic areas. We're going to also look at the current water quality conditions. We'll go through the history of the legislation within these areas, and we'll look at the activities of the agencies involved in restoration. We're going to also look at what the Florida statutes say that the district needs to do when we revise these rules. We're going to present a draft concept for the rule and give you things to think about, things that we are considering as we're drafting these rule texts. And we're going to wrap up with our timeline. This is really our last workshop one, but we'll show you the schedule that we had, and we will let you know how you can stay involved. Oh, and I forgot to mention that my slide presentation is really only 19 slides long, so please hold your comments and questions till the end. Okay, so we're going to start on this next slide, and we're going to discuss what is the Northern Everglades. And so this map on the left-hand side of this slide shows the Lake Okeechobee watershed in purple, the St. Lucie River watershed in this orangish-yellow color, and the Caloosahatchee River watershed in this green color. And if you're wondering, well, why are we doing rulemaking? Well, as Pam mentioned, specifically, the Florida statutes have directed the Water Management District to revise the 40E-61 rules for Lake Okeechobee and to develop new rules for the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie River watersheds. And you may be wondering, well, why does the Florida statutes say that? Now, this next slide kind of answers that question. It depicts graphs for the 3 Northern Everglades watersheds, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has determined that these water bodies within these watersheds are impaired. They've also set something called total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, which we also call restoration goals for each of these watersheds. And you will see on the left-hand side of the graph is the restoration goals for these water bodies, and on the right-hand side is the current water quality conditions from each of these watersheds. And so you can see why restoration is necessary. So on this next slide, I want to go through the history of the restoration efforts within the Northern Everglades. It all began in 1987 with something called the Surface Water Improvement and Management Act. And there was a piece of that act, it had a specific number. It was 373.4595, which was specific to Lake Okeechobee and was the basis for the existing 40E-61 rules. Now, that same particular statute today is known as the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program, or the NEEP. Now, I've laid out a lot of history on this slide. There's been a lot of changes to get where we are today. I'm not going to go through every single point, but there are some things that I do want to highlight. The first is actually that there's a second statute, 403.067. That statute governs how DEP develops its total maximum daily loads and determines how water bodies are impaired. And in 2005, that statute was amended to say that the Department of Environmental Protection could use something called Basin Management Action Plans, or BMAPs, as the plans for restoration where they have developed TMDLs. It said they could. It didn't say that they had to. In 2007, that's when 373.4595 became the NEEP, or the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. That is also when that statute expanded the boundaries to include the river watersheds. Between 2012 and 2014, Basin Management Action Plans were developed for the 3 Northern Everglades watersheds. Now, in 2016 is when we had a lot of changes to the statute. That is when the NEEP was amended, and Basin Management Action Plans are now required for the 3 Northern Everglades watersheds. So DEP has no choice. They must use BMAPs. The other thing that happened in 2016 was the district was directed to revise 40E-61. Now, because the underlying authorities for the original rules have changed so much, the existing rules are obsolete, and the district must really start from scratch with our rulemaking. The other thing that happened in 2016 is the coordinating agency roles were redefined. And the coordinating agencies are the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the South Florida Water Management District. And this next slide highlights their activities. DEP has the lead on basin management, has the lead on water quality through its basin management action plans. DACS has the lead on agricultural BMPs, and the district is to take the lead on hydrologic improvements through its watershed protection plans, which consists of the Research and Water Quality Monitoring Program and the watershed construction projects. 40E-61 is a program under the watershed protection plans. So now that we know where 40E-61 fits into the picture, the big picture for restoration, let's look at what the statute specifically directed the district to do. And we've mentioned the first 2 bullets. The district must revise 40E-61 for the lake watershed, and we have to develop new rules for the river watersheds. The other thing that the 2016 statute directed the district to do was to make sure that the rules are consistent with the NEEP statute itself and with 403.067, which is that statute that governs basin management action plans. The district must also provide a monitoring program or monitoring requirements for those not implementing best management practices either through DACS or DEP. So we have to provide it for ag and non-ag. And in 2016, the statute directed that there be a research and water quality monitoring program. So this next slide highlights the boundary changes. On the left side of the slide, we have a map that shows the existing 40E-61 boundary. On the right-hand side, we have that same boundary superimposed over the NEEP boundary. So to be consistent with the NEEP, we will definitely have to expand the boundaries of the rules. Now on this next slide, before we get into considerations, I want to take a moment to explain why we do not have draft rule text yet. Drafting rule text is very complex, and this watershed is quite large. It's about 5 million acres, and it's very diverse. There are urban areas, there are agricultural areas, and staff was concerned that we could draft something and it might work for 60% of the constituents, but it may be unreasonable or impractical for the remaining 40. So we wanted to come out and present our concepts and get feedback on that. We will be coming back out with draft rule text in the future, in the near future, and I'll talk more about that later. So things that we need to consider while we're drafting these rules, we need to consider what the statutes require the district to do. We want to look at current water quality conditions. We want to avoid duplication with other regulatory programs. We want to see if there are places, if there are any gaps within the restoration effort that the district could fill, that it's within our legislative authorities. And today we're going to present a conceptual framework, and we also want your feedback on that. So this next slide goes into the overall draft concept, which consists of 3 components. The first is a monitoring component, which actually has 2 parts. First, we need to provide requirements for those not implementing DACs or DEP BMPs. The second part would be to use existing monitoring networks to represent nutrient levels from contributing areas, to support research, and to evaluate nutrient reduction technologies and projects so that the coordinating agencies could make informed decisions. Now, when we look at the monitoring networks to use, we did get a lot of feedback at our Okeechobee meeting because the maps that we've handed out to you today represent the district's monitoring efforts. And you'll notice that there are some areas where it looks like there may be gaps, but actually other entities are conducting the monitoring. And, well, I can't see which map. Okay, thank you. The map on the far right here has the DEP's nutrient monitoring sites as pulled from their Watershed Information Network, or WIN. DEP sent us this shapefile. So this includes sites from the district and from DEP itself, and also other entities like I think City of Cape Coral collects samples, Reedy Creek Improvement District. So anyone who's collecting nutrients that give their data to DEP and is in their WIN network is on that map. And we brought that specifically so that those interested in where monitoring is occurring overall can look at that. And those can be some things that we could also consider when we look at these rules. But back to the concept. So, as I said, we're going to have a monitoring network, and then we need to establish, once we collect all this data, a way to assess the data to track the progress. And then we would want to have some kind of triggers that would trigger an action, and we would need to define the actions within the rule too. And I'm going to go into more details on these concepts just a little bit later. But I want to just pause again and let people know that, you know, when we're considering all the ideas, we have to remember that what may work very well for certain stakeholders may cause a severe hardship for others. That's why it's so important to seek the feedback, because we want to have rules that are reasonable, implementable, and that will not cause undue unintended consequences. And also, all ideas also have to be within our statutory authorities. And our goals, of course, is to assist in achieving the restoration goals. So continuing on with the draft concepts, the monitoring component, the first part of that, we need to have requirements in the rules for those who are not implementing BMPs. And we will have to make sure that we are consistent with DEP's statewide monitoring rule. And I believe we gave that out as a handout. I know we had some of those, if you're interested in what those rules say. So we could be, though, more specific for this area. And I listed a few things on the slide, ways that we could be more specific. We also need to consider what's practical. We've received a lot of feedback that in some areas of the watershed, monitoring is not always practical or it's difficult. So we need to look at what we could require. And you may have other ideas that we could consider as well. Now, the second part of the monitoring component, again, is to look at the established monitoring network. And again, this map on this slide is just representing the district's monitoring. And we have monitoring at the basin level, which those are shown by the red squares. Can you guys see the arrow that I have, or no? Okay, let me try this. Here we go. Can you see that? Yes, okay, sorry. I was pointing before and I guess you guys couldn't see. So the red squares represent the basin level monitoring. That's where we have monitoring of flow and concentrations and we can calculate loads. So for example, in Fishing Creek, we're monitoring here. And then upstream of that, we have what we call our upstream monitoring. Those are typically concentration grab samples. And we have recently expanded this monitoring, or we're working on expanding the monitoring, I should say. And those are the yellow circles, are the proposed expanded sites. The green circles are the existing upstream sites. And with our expansion, we're going to also monitor some additional parameters. So we'll have speciation of the nutrients, which should assist in determining the right type of project for each place. And again, there is other monitoring conducted by DEP in some of the areas that seem a little like there's no locations or no monitoring stations. So the district could look at that as well to determine how we can mesh that all into our assessment for this rulemaking effort. So once we've established the monitoring, we then need to assess the data that we are collecting. There may be already existing long-term nutrient trends. We need to try to decide what kind of statistical tests we're going to use. Are we going to use averages? Will we look at trends? And another thing that we might want to consider is a combination of factors and the context of it. For example, there's areas within the watershed where there's a very nice decreasing trend, but something called the unit area load within that area is quite high compared to other areas of the watershed. And what I mean by unit area load is if you take the load for that region and divide it by the acreage, that gives you the unit area load for that area. So even though it has a nice decreasing trend, if it still has a high unit area load, maybe that should still trigger some sort of action. So we need to look at that as well. And you may have other ideas during our public comment period. So once we've determined that action needs to be taken, we then need to define what types of actions will happen. And I've just listed a few actions here. I'm sure there's many others that you might have suggestions that we'll be happy to hear about. Some of the suggestions we have here are certainly we'd want to communicate our findings to the Department of Environmental Protection and DACS. They may reevaluate their BMPs. They may take the data that we've collected, especially if we have different types of speciation, and say we notice that one area is high, let's say in particulate phosphorus. Well, then they might want to go to their entities and say, hey, you need to implement more sediment controls in this area. Another action that may be triggered by this is conducting additional water quality investigations. There may be areas within the watershed where we need to do additional flow monitoring. Flow monitoring is very expensive, but maybe we would want to concentrate that in a particular area if we're seeing the trends going in the wrong direction. The actions could trigger additional regional projects, such as stormwater treatment areas, like the Lakeside Ranch STA, or the actions could trigger some kind of implementation of improved water management systems. Southwest Florida Water Management District has a cost share program called FARMS, where they cost share tailwater recovery systems. And it's possible the district could do something like that. And again, I'm sure there's other ideas that you might have as well. So that pretty much wraps up the concept. So I've just got a few more slides here. One is on our timeline. We are currently at the first bar. This is our last workshop to present the concepts. We're going to take all the comments we hear and go back and start considering and drafting rule text in December, and we hope to come back out in the end of January and again do a second set of workshops with draft rule text. And so that puts us on track to try to have the rules done by April of 2021. This was our workshop schedule. We've been in a lot of different locations, but this is our last one today. And you can stay involved by speaking out today, speaking with us afterwards. You can give us handwritten comments. We'd hope to get most comments by the end of November, but since this meeting was a little bit later, if you could give us comments by the second week of December, that would be great, so that we could include that in drafting our rules. And we also have a website where you can leave comments and find out the latest information on the rules. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. We do have a handheld mic. Danielle will bring it to you. Please remember to state your name and who you're representing for the record before providing your comment or question. Thank you. Oops. Okay. I should mention that this is our conceptual timeline, and rulemaking can be very complicated, so this is our best estimate as when we will get things done, but please note that sometimes things happen beyond our control. So yes, the presentation is posted online already. If you look at the November 5th date, under that, it is posted.
Good morning. My name is Susan Caruso. I'm with Broward Sierra Club. Thank you for letting us come to this workshop and providing feedback. I'm curious, you said that there is a 60-40 where some of the rules would be great for 60% and maybe even devastating for 40%. Could you identify the stakeholders that you consider in the 60 and the stakeholders in the 40?
That was actually just a example. I don't know. It could be 80-20. I don't know. And again, that was if we came out with text and we hadn't spoken to folks. So I don't really have it's just an example. It wasn't, yeah, they're not real numbers.
I'm also curious about, you said initiating monitoring instead of BMPs. Would that apply to farmers that are already doing BMPs and they would be switching to monitoring, or they're grandfathered in?
Okay, I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're asking if somebody is already implementing BMPs through DACs, if they're required to do monitoring. The answer to that would be no, because the statute says you either implement BMPs or you do monitoring.
And how do you know if they're working?
How do I know that the BMPs are working?
Correct. Or minimizing daily limits.
Okay, the BMPs, if someone is implementing BMPs, the statute gives you a presumption of compliance with water quality standards. That's what the statute says.
I'm just curious, can you give us examples of what some of the BMPs are?
Okay, yes, there are BMPs usually of 3 different types. They have nutrient controls, where perhaps farmers are looking at fertilizer applications. They may do tissue sampling, soil sampling before they apply fertilizer. They may have sediment controls, where they're looking to make sure that their waterways are grassed. They may also have water management controls, where they have implemented riser culverts so that they are only discharging within a certain amount of when they receive a certain amount of water. But the Department of Agriculture is really the person in charge of agricultural BMPs in the Northern Everglades. So I know there are some staff here that might be able to talk to you afterward if you have additional questions on that.
Hi, Laura Reynolds, representing the Isaac Walton League, as well as the Native Plant Society. Wanted to just ask a question about whether, if you found a hot spot through monitoring, and that particular landowner is not engaged in BMPs, is there some kind of a trigger to require something under any of the rules?
If a landowner is not implementing BMPs, and I know DAX and DEP work together to try to ensure that everyone who's ag is enrolled. I believe that DAX turns them over to DEP to deal with enforcing on that.
Okay, so the answer is if a hotspot was found, that there is a mechanism to correct it.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, that had to do with if they were not implementing BMPs anywhere, not necessarily if it was a hotspot. I kind of forgot that part of the question. But either way, DAX and DEP are working together to make sure everybody who needs to be enrolled is enrolled. If they're not, then they're going to have to do monitoring.
Okay, but that doesn't answer the question. So again, if there's a hotspot that is found through monitoring or any other way, how is that dealt with? Does it raise to another level, or is a BMP enough even if it's not dealing with the problem?
Okay, in terms of, I think that's what we're trying to do with these rules. We're trying to assess where there are certain areas within the watershed that may be going in the wrong track. They may have increasing trends. And again, I kind of outlined several of the actions that could happen. We would certainly notify DAX and DEP, and they may go ahead and reassess the BMPs within those areas. But that's not really in place yet.
Okay. So as part of this, you can make those kind of suggestions of how to trigger something more mandatory than currently exists to deal with the problem.
We can certainly notify our agency partners where we're seeing water quality concerns, yes.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Sue Caruso again. I'm assuming that farms or agricultural lands are considered non-point sources of pollution, correct?
Correct.
Because you don't individually monitor each agricultural owner. It would, and
Correct.
I'm assuming it would be way too expensive to do that, or?
Yes. The monitoring that I spoke of, there's really like 3 tiers. One would be an individual farmer if they're not implementing BMPs, and that also could be somebody who is non-ag. Then the other monitoring was related to district monitoring, which we have at the basin level and we have at the upstream. So it's downstream of multiple landowners, but upstream of our basin monitoring station.
So when you talk about more monitoring for perhaps a problem area that you find, you still are not really going to be able to pick out the source of that problem. I'm not sure how more monitoring helps when you identify that there is more nutrient loading, but you really can't identify the source of that nutrient loading.
Well, we would go up into those areas. So if we had an area within the watershed where we were seeing high concentrations, then we'd want to do additional monitoring there. And that may lead to us being able to identify areas. Another project that we're trying to do is we're trying to delineate the drainage areas for our monitoring sites. So we'll know within that drainage basin who flows to those sites. And that would help us to identify those that may need to do additional things, or areas where additional projects need to be implemented.
One last thing, because I have great respect for farmers. I think they're, highly underrated, 24/7, very tough job. But is there any government programs that help them implement better BMPs or more BMPs and help them monetarily?
That's what the DAX program does. They have cost share dollars to help the farmers implement their BMPs.
My name is H.M. Ridgely, and I got a quick question about legacy. I know we discuss it in all the BMAPs, legacy loads in the various basins is noted, but if, we know where the impaired basins are. I mean, this isn't rocket science. We're putting monitoring out there in places we know we have problems. So when in this rulemaking process, how is legacy going to be addressed and tease out the difference between a current discharge, whether it's urban, ag, or anywhere else, and what's in that conveyance or reservoir, whatever it is, river, I mean, I think it needs to be addressed because it's huge. As you and I talked before the meeting, there's some areas where, like the Upper East Coast, where ag doesn't even hardly exist up there anymore. And C23 is as hot as it's ever been. And nobody's fertilizing any. There's 200,000 acres of citrus that doesn't exist anymore up there for the last almost 10 years now. So that's obviously a huge problem. It's just, I mean, I think the bottoms of those canals and probably all the feeder ditches, urban and ag alike, are just loaded with phosphorus and probably nitrogen. So there's going to be hot spots. We know where they are. The monitoring is just going to prove what we already know. It's probably not what's currently being discharged is the biggest problem. I mean, obviously we have to stop doing harm. That's step one. But the legacy load is, I think, the biggest issue we have, and it has to be addressed in this rulemaking.
Thank you for that comment. Yes, actually, one of the actions could be, if we're finding high phosphorus in certain locations or nitrogen, it could be that it would trigger more research into that areas. And we actually did receive a comment like that also in Okeechobee. We were requested to do more research. But again, everything's going to depend. There's only a certain number of resources, so we'll have to prioritize, and hopefully we can have some kind of prioritization of which actions are triggered, which types. Those are all things that could be considered within the rulemaking.
Hi, this is Yogesh from the Everglades Foundation. First of all, thanks for today's workshop. We welcome this 40E-61 revision, making 40E-61 consistent with NEEP and latest BMAP was very important, and this is very exciting. I have a couple of comments. The revised 40E-61 should consider basin load allocations that will be consistent, or that should meet Lake Okeechobee TMDL of 105 metric tons. So sub-basin allocation, so sum of all basin loads coming into Lake Okeechobee should sum up to 105 metric tons, and also consistent with 40 parts per billion flow rated mean concentration inflowing into the lake from any of the sub-basins. Secondly, the existing 40E-61 has these assimilation coefficients, which are used as constants. There are two tables in the existing
Yes.
rule, and for the, as I remember it correctly, for the southern basins, assimilation coefficient of 1 is being used, and for northern basins, all basins, it's something like 6.7.
Yes.
However, these assimilation rates, they are highly dependent on locations of specific farms or source loads. So, in BMAP process, I learned that they have developed something called load estimation tool, and that they have produced very detailed maps of, they call what is something similar to assimilation coefficients. They call it attenuation grids. So something like that should be incorporated while specifying or developing numbers for specific basins or subbasins.
Thank you for that comment. That was a good comment. Okay, if no one else has a comment, we want to thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate all the comments we've received. Again, you can meet with us. We're going to be hanging out here to talk to people if they would like to come up and present other comments. We'll take comments on the website, handwritten comments. We just really appreciate your feedback. Thank you. And there's the website, too.